evening, good morning to to everyone from wherever you are around the world. Thank you for joining us today. We are very excited to bring you another episode in our open source training series. Today we're going to be bringing you the power of cognitive flexibility. Definitely a key skill I think that we should all be practicing, especially in these sorts of disruptive times that we find ourselves in. To those that are joining us for the first time today, just a reminder that our open source series is centered around our Workforce 2030 curriculum, which is housed on our e-learning platform OmniStack. So if you're interested in delving more into these concepts, or if you would just like to sign up for a course, then please go and visit our website and just enjoy our courses. They are readily available on OmniStack on our website. Today I would just like to remind you about some housekeeping rules. If you could just remember, oh, a little bit of a drum roll, to please keep all of your microphones switched off, just so that we don't experience any sort of sound issues. A reminder that we will be sending you our on-demand recording and the slide deck post the event. And should you have any questions, please just raise your hand and Mario will engage you. And just make use of our chat box. We encourage interactiveness and we want to engage you. Just make full use out of that. Today, I would now like to welcome Mario Pepino, who's going to be our lead facilitator today. Mario has been with Omni for over 10 years. He comes with a wealth of knowledge. He is charismatic, and you are guaranteed to walk away with some key tools, skills that you can go back into your organization and implement, and also into your teams. So I do hope that you enjoy the session today, and thank you very much, Mario. Over to you.
Okay. Cognitive thinking and flexibility, you had to make sense of what I was saying without my microphone on. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Jade, for the housekeeping and for managing our chat through the course of today. We welcome you all, and we hope that you enjoy the afternoon with us as we explore cognitive flexibility today. So in our last open source training in May, we explored creativity with Cassandra Julius, who is our brand and marketing executive. In exploring all of this, it's around us preparing for working and being in exponential organizations and to see our environments grow as well. When we look at cognitive flexibility, today I'm going to share some of our findings as well as some of the information and some nuggets from our e-learning course, The Power of Cognitive Flexibility. If there are any questions or if you are interested in joining us for the program, please connect with us on our website or on LinkedIn, and one of our consultants will get back to you. So as we operate in exponential organizations, we actually are very fast moving towards Workforce 2030. And very many of us have been challenged in our thinking. Why? Because as humans, we have habits and we developed habits. We grow older, we get set in our ways, and we can become a lot more resistant to change and handling change than what we sometimes perceive ourselves to be. So today we're going to explore 3 skills and our 3 key takeaways, and these are linked into us becoming more adaptable as we explore this whole concept of cognitive flexibility as well. For the first key takeaway, we're going to be looking at intellectual flexibility, particularly exploring what the emotional EQ component is, as well as the mental cognitive flexibility component. We're then also going to explore what it means for us to be receptive to change and some of the reasons why we should actually be very receptive to being flexible with our thinking and how we adapt our thinking. And lastly, we are going to look at how we become creative and how we develop creativities and our own creative abilities in this concept of cognitive flexibility. As we move through all of what we're going to discuss this afternoon, or what we're going to share this afternoon, please also just remember that one of the key skills that links all of this together is communication. And it links together through how we communicate, what our own communication style is, because it's around sharing of ideas, developing and growing ourselves, as well as our teams around us in the organizations that we operate in. So as we begin with emotional cognitive flexibility, we're going to explore a little bit around Daniel Goldman, and in his developing of his theories for EQ, he embraced 5 main constructs. The first construct there is self-awareness, then self-regulation, the construct of empathy, motivation, and then lastly, our social skills. Again, linking to how we communicate and the way in which we communicate. For today, we're going to focus around the self-regulation component, because with the self-regulation, it goes very strongly into how we regulate our own emotions, and not only regulating our emotions from a personal perspective, but also how we regulate our emotions when we are adapting to changing circumstances. I think for our time particularly, we did not have any major world wars, but we have had this COVID pandemic hanging over us for the last 2 years. And if we think about some of the examples of us having to practice cognitive flexibility, it sits inside of many of us having to deal with things like income challenges. We've had to deal with workplace challenges and how we work. Some of us have had to deal with retrenchment or restructuring organizations. From a more personal perspective, many of us have had to think about how we're going to deal without our regular fixes of cigarettes and alcohol. Those lockdown levels have changed from 1 month to the next, every 30 days, not having certainty around where we are heading and also what changes could be anticipated. All of those link into how we deal with emotional cognitive flexibility, and also how we self-regulate ourselves in the environments in which we operate. If we refer to Lure, we can see that Lure in Zara of 2008, they've defined emotional flexibility as our ability for openness, our ability for expansiveness and non-defensiveness in the face of stress or unfamiliar situations. I think the pandemic has certainly challenged us when it comes to unfamiliar situations, because there is so much new that had to be created from all the challenges and all the changes that we were being provided with, sometimes on a daily or hourly basis as well. So when we look at emotional cognitive flexibility, I'm going to ask us now to engage in an activity in the chat. And I would like you to think of examples where you were forced to actually change or to become flexible within your personal timeline. What has occurred in your space that has forced you to become more flexible? And let's see what some of those kind of situations or some of your experiences are in that regard. So as we wait for some comments to pop into the chat, I would like us to think about some of the things. Thank you, Jade. I think you're a little bit early for me. Yeah. So please think about some of the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So Cassandra shares there working with hybrid teams. We've been very challenged in how we work. The workplace challenges for us as leaders are a very real challenge when we look at from everything from our infrastructure all the way to the people that we have working with us. Joe shares that having to present facilitated programs or not present facilitated programs remotely with new technology, using new platforms and new geographies. For us too, even in our space, we went from being in a face-to-face environment where everything that we did had to be moved to electronic. We moved our e-learning platforms forward by almost 2 years in terms of development. We've taken facilitators in our space who were working with learners on one-on-one basis in classroom situations, and we had to become the content creators for everything that we are doing as well. Cassandra also shares the flexible work schedules, and now load shedding impacts productivity. I think all of us are struggling a bit with stage 6. At least in Cape Town, we're only at stage 4. So that is a little bit of a relief, but it still means that we have to be flexible in what we do. Julianne shares they work from home versus office, changing team compositions, changing work hours. We've got us staying focused in our home and working environments, doing something completely new like conducting virtual interviews. How do we assess somebody on the other side of a screen who we actually want to be engaging in our spaces and being part of a team that they don't necessarily have a feeling for because they have not met us? Then also us having to be more empathetic towards others. And all of these link into this whole concept of mental cognitive flexibilities. So as we explore the questions that I'm going to pose to you, I would like you to think and consider, what are your attitudes and thinking around a nuclear family? We grow up inside of what should be parents and children inside of our nuclear families. But when we start to consider what mental cognitive flexibility is, we actually end up having to ask ourselves, how well are we able to do certain things? So how well are we able to mentally adapt to our environment? If we look at the makeup of many families now, we have traditional parents, mother, father, and children. We've got everything in our environments of grandparents raising children. We've got absent parents. We've got mixed families. We've got divorcees and new relationships and the children coming into units. All of that challenges our thinking, and mentally we have to adapt to the environment. We get used to what we know to be, we get used to what we think, and then we have to also think about how well are we able to adopt to another person, another perspective. Everybody has an opinion around what is going on, what is a nuclear family. Everybody has an opinion in how you should manage your nuclear family or your new nuclear family as it's formed. Added to that, we also end up having to change and challenge our own thinking, because in our environments or where we grow up, many of us know what we expect of a nuclear family. We grow into relationships thinking about those particular nuclear families and having our own. And through circumstances, through changes, through health challenges, we find that all of those things change continuously. And it takes for us to adapt our own thinking in becoming more mentally cognitive or being more flexible in what we do. So as we move into the next component, we're going to see a few polls. I think Jade already posted one of the polls into the chat earlier on. The first question in the poll: are you able to deal with unpredictable moments in a calm and proactive manner? So very simply, a yes or no. And we've got 61% answering yes and 36% of us answering no. And we can see that starting to change a little bit as well. When we move into the next question, please, Jade. Can you juggle various tasks successfully? Are we able to juggle various tasks, or are we actually struggling to deal with everything that's on our plate a lot of the time? So can you juggle it? Yes, no, maybe. And let's see what some of the responses are that are coming through. So as the questions pop up as well, you will find that they are in the chat. So the second one, as our results start coming through, 47 or 50% of us have said yes, so we are able to juggle more than one thing at a time. There's a 10% movement towards no. And for many of us, it's an uncertainty, because we know that we want to do things in the correct manner. We know that we need to fix ourselves and do things according to processes and procedures. And if we're having to do multiple things a lot of the time, there's always that sense that we are compromising what we are doing and how we are completing things as well. Jade, the next question, please. When something unexpected happens, can you adjust your approach based on what has occurred? If something unexpected happens, can you generally adjust your approach on what has occurred? And so it's nice to see that there's a lot of 100% absolute yeses coming through. And I think it's an important one when we consider how we react to situations, how we actually deal with change, how we manage the environments in which we operate as well. And for us as leaders, we need to be able to adjust our approaches if something does happen, because a lot of the time we have to deal with, we have to be reactive rather than proactive in instances. Lisa shares there, it's a critical skill to be able to be adaptable. I think that's where these questions are heading. The last question, please, Jade. And for the last question, specifically for us as leaders in our environments, do we encourage others in our team to speak up and challenge the norm? And I don't think this is only about the people in our team, it's actually across all levels that we operate inside. Do we challenge people? Are we willing to deal with them challenging us sometimes? And are we ready to approach and deal with what the status quo is and see changes in that status quo? So again, we can see that there's almost 100% yes on this particular question, and that's a very good and very fair response across the board. If we look at all of these four questions together, are you able to deal with unpredictable moments in a calm and proactive and focused manner? Can you juggle various tasks successfully? When something unexpected happens, can you adjust your approach based on what has occurred? And then the last one of encouraging others in your team to speak up and challenge the norm. All of these, if we've answered no to any of them, or there's a maybe to any of them, it means that we need to be able to address who we are, how we think, and actually start to develop our own cognitive flexibility. And that's what this program that we offer is all about, being able to look at some of the tools and some of the ways of improving our own and developing our own cognitive flexibility. So as we continue on with mental cognitive flexibility, moving away from emotional side, in the environments that we operate, we are required to have flexibility. So we see that we're moving towards exponential growth. Many businesses are changing strategies. We've got additional challenges with people moving back into the workplace. The pandemic, as much as it is considered to be over, still poses a lot of challenges for many people from a personal perspective as well as from a workplace perspective. And in our roles as leaders, flexible thinking is one of our core critical skills. So we've got our flexible thinking on the one side, we've got our working memory, and we also have our self-control. So if we take the example of actually writing a report, we will use flexible thinking in how we put the report together, what kind of words we would use, and what the target or preparing it for the target audience that it's meant to be. Our working memory allows us to format that report and put it into paragraphs and headings and everything else, while our self-control, that inhibitory control component, it allows us to be focused and manage what we do and follow through from one end to the next. So if we do not use our working memory, and our working memory and the self-control sits inside of our crystallized intelligence, we cannot be focused on using crystallized intelligence all the time. And this is where we are challenged around changing how we do things and changing and seeing things from a different perspective. Katie Hamilton, in her definition, she talks about flexible thinking from the basis that cognitive flexibility is made up of the brain's ability to ease and switch one's thinking, whether it's a train of thought, whether it's a task or doing something from one task to another, so that we are able to respond and adapt to different stimuli. And this cognitive flexibility, in many instances, it's referred to as being task switching. But importantly, it's around doing one task and then another, not doing multiple tasks and multitasking across the board. As we look at our mental agility, it also involves us dealing with our ability to change our beliefs and our assumptions. And part of mental cognitive flexibility sits inside of how we are able to deal with different viewpoints and actually deal with different information and how we process that information. So we're going to go through a stroop test or stroop test, depending, But it's a Stroop test, and in this, it challenges us and the way we think. So I would like you to follow the instruction that is being played and then to do the instruction afterwards. So how easy was that activity? Because even after having gone through it a few times over, I'm still not getting it right. Yeah. And this is where it links to our working memory. Our working memory is automatically going to assumptions. And in those assumptions, it prevents us from challenging ourselves and doing things differently. The record there, Julianne shares, it was tricky. I totally agree. And Paul shares is not easy at all. And Desiree says that it was more difficult in the beginning. But it is, like Desiree says, very difficult. We start off and we know that we should be saying a color and not the word, but our brain is registering that word. And I think that is where cognitive flexibility comes in. It's us starting to challenge ourselves and to become a bit more adaptable. So one of the other things, we'll have another one where we look at your mental cognitive, your ability to understand what's going on. So I want you to read the following sentence. And in the sentence, it asks you, how many times does the letter O appear in the sentence? So how many times does the letter O appear in the sentence? And let's see your answers in the chat. So I can hear you counting very quickly. And so there's some 8s coming through. There's a 5 coming through. There's another 8. Have the 8s done this activity before? Lot more 8s. So you're counting very well. Yeah. Yeah. So the correct answer is 8. And if we're able to find all of the 8s or all of the O's, and we found it 8 times, then very well done. When we were running this earlier, one of our colleagues said, but if you look at the mouth, it's an O as well, so it's a 9. But very, very well done. The chances are that we actually have not seen all of them. And especially where we have got very common words like to or all, that is where we would lose that kind of that recognition of the letter O. If we think about some of the other tricks and tips that we go through, there's the exercise of us reading a number, a series of numbers put together in letters or in words. And for many of us, the ability to understand what is there shows our adaptability and our cognitive flexibility. We know that if we have studied English and we've learned English particularly, your first letter and your last letter of your words will stick in your memory. And it doesn't matter what the order of the letters is in between, you will still read the word for what it is. And that also links into our memory. It doesn't matter what we see, we are automatically going to assume, like it was shared earlier on, that we will go back to what we know in that answer. So Julianne says that all of this is a very brilliant example of how we have default behavior, and it's based on past experience. And that is where our memory retention sits in what we do. So when we break cognitive flexibility down, we can see that there are 3 key characteristics. The first one is that it does imply a process of learning. It, like most things, it can be developed and it can be acquired. It is not something that we can do automatically. We have to learn, and we have to physically choose to learn to do things differently. Secondly, it also involves us adapting cognitive processes and strategies. And a lot of the time, it's around our behavior. We have default behavior. Our memory and working memory is default behavior. Our ability to practice inhibitory control, that self-control, it's a learned behavior. It's around we needing to understand what those behaviors are and to practice changing those behaviors and not be reliant on our reflex responses in what we do and how we interact. And then one of the other key characteristics around this is that this adaptation towards cognitive flexibility, it sits inside around us moving forward and dealing with new and unexpected environmental changes. If we look at some of the challenges that we are sitting with in terms of your work from home, prior to COVID, we were all functional inside of offices. We were working from a day-to-day basis inside set environments. The biggest challenge at that time was around how feasible is remote working. 26th of March 2020, we go into extreme lockdown, and that whole lockdown had forced us to change our ideas around work. For some of us, we were able to flex and be adaptable to that new challenge of finding work and finding home life and finding the balance between home and work. For others of us, it skewed what we knew to be our work schedules or our work time. Suddenly we didn't have to factor in travel time, so it meant that we were able to work longer. Some of us were able to be more flexible in how we worked. It's all around us being able to meet the deliverables that we needed to do and find a way to do the work appropriately. In many instances, we find that organizations have thrived with people being at home because they've been a lot more productive in what they do. They've been a lot more focused in what they do. But as time has gone on, we've become comfortable with where we are. The challenges that we face now, we start to reintroduce our staff into the workplaces. We start to reintroduce people into engaging with people again. And now we can't deal with that change. Where we've had working environments before in a distinct work and home environment, now it's a case of, but I don't want to go back to work because home is comfort. And we've developed habits around our comfort zones, about where we need to be or where we feel safest. Moving back into the workplace suddenly raises a number of questions. But on a bigger scale, bigger picture, we're looking at situations now where suddenly a 4-day week becomes a question. If we look at what has happened during COVID as well, many, particularly in France and in Denmark as well, they went and regulated hours of contact to define what is work and what is private time. All around the breaking the barriers of that cognitive flexibility and changing people's mindset to what was going on, because we've formed habits in what we do. The challenges of 4-day work weeks are now becoming our reality again. As we look at people reintroduced into the workplace, suddenly we see that people are resisting being in the spaces that they were before, or we find that there are organizations that are no longer allowing people back, or they've changed their rulings completely around where work needs to be. With all of these changes as well, we find that we need to be able to adapt. And in adapting, it's around us understanding that there is benefit to us accepting cognitive flexibility and becoming more aware and more receptive to these changes. So if we think about just this week for all of us, we've gone from being in masked environments and having to follow strict sanitary controls to suddenly not having masks at all. And for all of us, it's around understanding that change is probably our only constant. We've looked at going back to normality nearly overnight, and many instances people did not know what had happened in the course of that 12 hours leading up to the morning. For example, we are so used to operating under COVID protocols. One of the managers that was in training that I was conducting last week was called out of training to go and manage a customer on the same day that the mask ruling was reversed, not knowing that actually those changes had happened and that it wasn't an issue anymore for that person to step into the environment without a mask. But because we'd been conditioned to the situation that we were in, the staff were not allowing that customer, who had every right not to be wearing a mask, entry into the store, which caused issues for all of them. So with that, our adaptability and our ability to change, whether we are switching thinking or whether we are reacting to circumstances or managing our reactions to circumstances, sits inside of one of the reasons why we need to be receptive. If we look at flexibility as well, the more flexible we are, it's going to allow us to tackle challenges differently, even when we have multiple things happening around us. We become more focused on achieving results for every situation rather than what we know, where we are sitting with specific processes or specific procedures or specific ideas of what has happened before. So if we look at the chat quickly, it's shared there, change is the consistent metric, and we will require all people to engage better with change. In the current climate, the change curve of denial to acceptance requires overlapping change curves and more expedited change cycles. So we've gone from being forced to do things like wearing a mask to having the choice to do that. But for many of us, the thought process around how and why still needs to be managed in terms of our own levels of flexibility and our own levels of adaptability. For accepting and being more receptive to change, it is important for us to be receptive because there is proven evidence and research that it is good for mental health. We look at how we improve our mental health through being aware of cognitive flexibility, through practicing cognitive flexibility, making us far more adaptable, making us far more flexible. So what are some of these components that we actually need to consider when it comes to cognitive flexibility? This diagram was shared in our LinkedIn profile a little while ago, and it sits inside of the specific components. The first one there is our sense of awareness. When it comes to awareness, how self-aware are we? How socially aware are we? That self-awareness is our ability to do self-assessment. It is us being able to understand and know what is happening within ourselves, our thought processes, how we engage. From a social perspective, it's also around our responsiveness, and it's around our responsiveness to what is happening around us. What is our responsiveness towards each other, to the people that we engage with, to the teams that we work with. Inside of all of this, we need to consider the aspects of consciousness. Are we conscious of who we are, where we are at? We need to consider recognition. What is important for us as individuals? What is important for those around us? The realization as well is important because that realization sits inside of our ability to have agility in our brain. It sits inside of us being able to move and include people rather than be exclusive or isolate ourselves like we've been forced to do. In many instances, our perceptions also need to be addressed because as time has changed, our beliefs have changed, information has changed things towards us. And this links back to that question around what does a nuclear family mean to you? We have to understand that perceptions need to change. And with those changes in perceptions, we also find that understanding each other is important, understanding yourself is important, and appreciating those around you and appreciating your own efforts as well in your own development. Because all of this affects how we are more and more flexible and adaptable to the spaces that we find ourselves in. That second component sits inside of confidence. And if I have to ask you, how confident are you? Knowing that we've been isolated for almost 2 years in many instances, how confident are we in engaging with people again? Because part of us developing links into us being able to rebuild relationships that we've set aside. We're no longer people on screens. We are now back to face-to-face interactions. We are able to hug each other if we need to hug each other. We're able to touch and feel and be with each other and appreciate each other's company again. So that confidence is actually our measure of self-belief. And that confidence can either be inborn or it's learned. Much of it sits inside of how assertive we are, where our assertiveness comes from. It comes in how we influence the people that we lead, how we influence those around us, how we influence those in our family, and the influence and the effect that we actually have on our communities that we operate in as well. And then again, that confidence links to how we feel about ourselves. Too many of us still practice negative self-talk. I know I'm one of them. So it's around becoming physically aware of when you do it, why you're doing it, and starting to feel better about ourselves, starting to feel better about who we are, and improving our mental health. We've been far too isolated for far too long, and it's time that we actually step out and start to become the individuals that we were prior to all of this going on in our world. All of this has an effect on our self-image, whether it's a positive effect, whether it's a negative effect. We have to become aware of what we do and how we engage. And all of that also links into us being adaptable and our levels of adaptability. In us being adaptable, are we capable of change? Are we capable of being changed? Because our adaptability affects our ability to actually operate in and function in the environments that we're in. Think about moving back to work. One of our clients that I've been training at for the last while, in the training sessions that we are conducting at the moment, those team members are only now connecting with each other again after having been separated for 2 years. They don't know how to connect with each other. I had a weird experience on training with another group a little while ago, where my learners are younger individuals, and in them engaging with each other, we've got a full classroom of people, but not a single one of them were able to sit and talk to each other. Everything was connected to what was in front of them and on their phone. And that limits our ability to be flexible. It limits our adaptability in the environments that we are in. The more adaptable we are able to become, the more we are able to be seen as team players, because our adaptability and our flexibility opens us up to challenges, and it opens us up to those changes. It links to our ability to become resilient and to be resilient. And the more that we are resilient, the easier it is for us to be flexible under sometimes very high stress and high pressures that we have to operate in. So we need to think about all of these things. So as much as there is a lot of significance and there's a lot of benefit to us practicing cognitive flexibility, we also find that there's a lot of challenges. And bizarrely enough, and I found this very interesting, that one of the biggest challenges that we face is age. So I never thought about it. I haven't really given it a lot of thought, but over the last little while, our age does influence our cognitive flexibility. When we are younger, we develop very rapidly. If you think about your toddlers, by the time that your child is 6 years old, they've already got imprinted on them their personality, a lot of their behaviors, how they communicate, their responses, because of what has happened. As we move from childhood into adulthood, we start to become more rigid, and we start to practice rigid thinking, because everything is around what is a process, what is a procedure, how do we move forward, where do we go to, and all of it follows strict timelines or a strict process of development. As we grow older, we actually lose cognitive flexibility. And this is where that whole the concept of us not being able to adapt and us becoming resistant to that, it's because of those habits that we form. It's because of the routines that we follow. So in all of this, we need to remember that we can actually hone our skills. We work in an environment here where lifelong learning is preached from start to finish. For every learner group that we engage with, for ourselves as individuals, for our team members, we talk about lifelong learning. And it's around us making sure that we're practicing cognitive flexibility by learning something new on a daily basis, or by learning something different, or reviewing how we actually engage. So while we can improve on our work and we can improve on cognitive flexibility, we also have to be very cognizant of barriers and these challenges that affect our mental agility. And for this one, I would like to just detail a few of what is on your screen. So for me particularly, and what is a standout here, is things like salience. So salience is our bias to be focused on prominent things. We are able to focus on prominent things and we ignore things that are less favorable to us. And a lot of it sits inside of the fact that we are impacted by information and particular social media. If we look at the Ukrainian-Russian situation right now, in some instances, it is considered to be a war. In other instances, it's considered to be propaganda. So where does our reality actually lie? Cognitive flexibility allows us to assess what we should be paying attention to and what we should not be paying attention to. If we look at the way that our regulations and our laws are changing, there's movement towards protection against false information. There's movement towards protection of private, personal information. We look at how organizations like Google are operating very differently in different environments based on what information is shared and how information is shared. The second one there that stands out is myopia. And this links very strongly to our sense of moral and particularly moral myopia. Because if we go through the process of myopia, it actually starts to distort our moral vision. Each one of us has our own morals. We have codes of ethics that we operate inside of. We inherently know what is right or wrong. Myopia distorts all of that. And when it distorts it, it actually alters our perceptions. And as it alters our perceptions, we start to engage and justify decisions that we make, whether it's a positive decision or whether it's a negative decision. We actually will justify it based on our myopia and what we choose to believe and what we choose to engage with. So the more we use cognitive flexibility when it comes to dealing with myopia, we actually start to understand what is the impact of our decision making, what are the consequences, and how we manage all of those. The third one is our low latent inhibitions. And for me, this is an interesting one because it looks at what is our old information versus our new information. We make assumptions based on what we see. So for myopia is TikTok, I think a lot of it, yes, it can be, but everybody's wanting to get in on that one right now. From the low latent inhibition, if you've got a friend who wears glasses and you are so used to seeing them wearing glasses, how quickly will you recognize or realize that they have a new pair of glasses? So if we are looking at our low latent inhibitions, because we've got old information, they wear glasses, we don't necessarily see that they wear glasses. But as soon as we become cognizant of the fact of, oh, look, they're wearing a new pair of glasses, now we start making mental assumptions based on what we see. And a lot of it sits inside of us suddenly becoming a why person. Why are we wearing new glasses? Why is it that particular style? Why is it that expensive? Those are the things that we start to find ourselves challenged with. And in that, it does affect our ability to see the bigger picture. So we need to be very careful and very aware of us making assumptions, going straight back to our reflexes rather than thinking through what we are doing or looking at things a little bit differently. The last two actually tie in together, and it sits inside of information overload and information bottleneck. We as a people right now live and thrive on information. And it sits inside of that information actually be able to overwhelm us. It impacts on our levels of decision making, and it creates this data smog. And in this data smog, it links to your bottlenecking of your information, where you do not necessarily have the ability to access the information that you need. And this means that our attention is very limited in some instances, and we have to refocus our attention. Because it impacts decision making, we can't necessarily make simple decisions. And one of the effects of this is that we become demoralized in what we do. And as we become demoralized, that whole thing of procrastination starts to trigger. If we don't understand our triggers for procrastination, we're going to find that information overload is one of those things that can keep us in not making decisions and sitting, not being able to deal with what is around us. That information bottleneck, cognitive flexibility helps us to actually start focusing on what are the things that we need to do, and it challenges our ability to actually see fact, and it challenges our ability to see what is important. So in here, it's got 5L cognitive flexibility is why. Any one of us that have kids know the why phase. I don't think mine have gone out of why phase at all, because everything is still a hukum or why. And we need to understand that these challenges do affect how we operate and what we do. So the last part of what we do and looking at how we develop our creativity. We've got a couple of things that we put together for you where we encourage you to develop your cognitive flexibility. The first one is to alter your everyday thinking. So in listening to the radio over the last week or so, they were talking about the habits of successful people and do we actually practice those habits? And one of the questions that they posed was, what do you do before you go to bed at night? And for many of us, we are on our phones, we are reading, we are scrolling, we are playing games. And the challenge here is alter your everyday thinking. For as long as we are on our phones, there is continuous stimuli coming at us. It's not only geared to what we are reading. If you're reading a news article, as you're scrolling through, there's headers that pop up. Oh, look, there's something else. Oh, look, there's something else. Check this video out. So it's continuous stimuli. The challenge is for us to actually pick up a book and read, because with picking up a book, suddenly we have to rely on our imagination. There's no additional stimulus. And because there's no additional stimulus, we are able to start focusing and re-looking at things. And in doing this, we're starting to retrain our brain a little bit. And we're learning a few new words in some instances, or learning to do things a little bit differently. The second one is to seek out new experiences. And for many of us, when you say seek out new experiences, oh no, I can't go and do anything new. I'm scared of that. I'm fearful of this, and it's not going to work. Think about your weekly menu that you have for supper. For many of us, we are so stuck in routine that we know that we're going to have a specific meal every Monday, every Tuesday, every Wednesday, every Thursday, every Friday. And very seldom will we actually change it up. So if that is you, one of the things you can do, go and try something new to eat and see what it does. Or go and prepare a new dish, do something different, spend a little bit of time to change the way you do things. So it's a simple thing, it's a small habit that we can change, but it does add to us opening ourselves to new experiences. We need to practice thinking creatively. A lot of our games that we play now are geared towards us becoming more creative, but we also get so used to doing this. There's a nice one around AI working against us. Yeah, we can. That's also another challenge as to why we should be reading a book and not sitting on a phone all the time. With the games that we're looking at, practicing creative thinking, we've actually got a couple of apps that we've located, and we'll share that with you in a moment. Then it says they don't always take the easy way. If we think about roadworks, we get affected by an accident in the morning and we have a choice. If we're thinking about developing cognitive flexibility, it's around, are we going to do the same thing just because we've always done it? Are we going to follow the same workflow because we've always done it and it's always worked? Never mind that part of the workflow might be redundant, but it's around us doing something different. So how often are we going to think about what our next step is? So last week, there was an accident on the N7 and it happened after I'd passed through. One of our other staff members was stuck in that. And she had the option of either staying on the road, and that is our choice a lot of the time, stay on the road, irrespective of the delays, doing what we do and keep on going, or do we physically switch on GPS and start to follow Delilah and see where Delilah takes us, hoping that we're going to get there timelessly and in time, and it actually did work. Going out of our way to meet new people is going to be one of our biggest challenges in the next little while. We are moving back into being in people's spaces. We are moving back to having to connect. And going out of our way to meet new people is around making the effort to connect with somebody, actually going to ask somebody a question, or getting to know those people that we've only been seeing on the screen for a little while. Actually physically spend time and go and do it. One of the things that we do in our space when it comes to getting to meet new people is looking at our workplace teams. We've got multi-generations inside of our workplace where we've got very new people coming into the work environment. And then there's those of us like me who's been around for 10 years or longer. And every second Monday, we've got this thing called the coffee date. And that coffee date is around just connecting with people, just to find out who they are, and sometimes even just to check in. So even where we've known somebody for a long while, it's like luck of the draw. We get an email that says you have a meeting request, you accept a meeting request, and you never know who's going to be on the other side of it. But it's important that you take the time just to sit and talk. And it's not about work, it's around connecting. Find out something new, find out something different. I said earlier on, we work in an environment and we live in our space. We talk about lifelong learning and we try to practice lifelong learning. As leaders, we've got mandate by government with our skills development that we have to encourage lifelong learning. But it's a practice that we need to put into play on a daily basis. We have to show and lead by example to encourage those people around us as well. And it's around learning something, and even if it's going from doing things the way we've always done it in the classroom to going to learn something new online, it's still around transferring how we learn and transferring the knowledge that we learn around us all day as well. And then the last one there is a difficult one and a challenging one. And it asks us to challenge our morals. If we think about society where we are right now, there's been so many changes that affect how we do things, what we do, the attitudes of people towards each other. We actually have to challenge our morals. That question that I asked earlier on around what does a nuclear family mean to you links inside of, are you able to actually change your morals? Are you able to relook at your values? Are you able to change your behaviors? Are you able to adopt? Are you able to think differently? So that when we go into the bigger world, we are a lot more tolerant of each other, we're a lot more aware of each other, and ultimately we can be a lot more present for each other. So I said earlier on that we've got a few tools for you. So let's look at some of the apps that we can actually use to improve our cognitive flexibility. So a few fun things to add to your screen and to enjoy away from the normal Candy Crush or Sugar Rush saga that we are so adept and used to in many instances. I'm very conscious that our time is moving forward. And let's actually just look at some of the things that we can do for our teams as well. When we look at cognitive flexibility in our teams, and this links very strongly to how we deal with conflict, how we manage ourselves when it comes to negotiation, how we engage and collaborate with each other. And all of these are little parts of what we've been doing in our open source training throughout the last little while. So as leaders, we have to be able to acknowledge the existence of different alternatives. We've got multi-generational teams, we've got different mindsets, we've got different attitudes. We are working, and we are lucky to be working with a lot of diversity from a cultural perspective, from a language perspective. All of that adds to us being able to deal with different people. Each person in our team brings something unique. Are we able to acknowledge what they bring, and in acknowledging what they bring, actually give them the opportunity to share, to grow, to help all of us develop as one? Then we need to also be thinking about what is our willingness in dealing with situations. Are we able to internally motivate ourselves? Because for many of us, it's a challenge to get out of bed in the morning, but we are still expected to go and motivate a team of individuals as well. So we need to be able to and willing to adjust our own thought processes. We need to be able to motivate who we are, get ourselves going so that we can be of a motivational influence to everybody else. And then lastly, we should be able to allow the individuals in our teams to feel confident about their abilities and to be able to act with self-efficiency or self-efficacy. Are they able to do what you ask of them to do? And in doing that, are they able to engage and actually build the team together? And then also those tools and those apps that we shared, there are books around that you can use. There's lots of other resources. Encourage your teams to get engaged with cognitive flexibility by trying some of those tools and exploring different ways to actually do all of those things as well. And then the last part of how we look at cognitive flexibility in our team, and I don't think I'm going to go into too great detail with this one because our time is very limited. It's around these 5 key components. So are we able to assess our current state? Know who is in your team, know what they are about as individuals, know who they are as individuals. You'll find that we want to create a monoculture. In that monoculture, it's everybody moving towards the same objective. Irrespective of how they do it, we are all moving towards the same objective. These multiple perspectives help us to build cognitive flexibility. It helps us to be able to address different viewpoints. It helps us to deal with the challenges around our processes. And a lot of the time, we need to focus on small changes. We can't always go and do something big all of the time. We actually think about little things, small, discrete changes. And the more changes we introduce, the more people are able to adapt to those smaller changes. It means that the cognitive flexibility of your team does grow. Then around discussing possible changes. Are you creating a space in your team that is a safe space? As a leader, we have we are tasked with the responsibility of creating a healthy environment from a communication perspective, from a relationship perspective, from a safe workplace or hustle perspective. It still means that we need to look at what are our routine processes. We need to challenge our teams, pardon. We need to challenge them to review the processes. Are they still valid? Are they still relevant? And if they're not, we also need to challenge them to improve processes. We find that where teams experience very complex problems or challenges, being able to use cognitive flexibility to bring them together helps them to deconstruct, and it also helps people to deal with things in smaller chunks. Then are we able to change or adapt our processes? We talk about exponential organizations. We talk about divergent thinking. Are we actually practicing what we are talking about? It's creative thinking. We talk about blue sky. Are we actually practicing it? Are we encouraging all of that? Or is it just words that we are using? Are we using the tools that are available? When last did your team go through a brainstorm or a mind map or try to find solutions through exploration? Our research has also shown that if we can use cognitive flexibility and it can be encouraged through reward, because if there are wellness programs in place, if there is some form of reward for doing things with innovation, it drives how people work, it drives our ability to deal with change, it drives our levels of flexibility and our adaptability to new environments. And it also ends up being a motivation. So if we understand what motivates our teams, it goes a long way to us to being able to drive the concept of cognitive flexibility. It's important for us as leaders to challenge our people. We need to find new ways to work. We need to create competitiveness. We need to improve efficiency. I think one of the biggest industries who are driving those kind of behaviors sits inside of our contact center spaces. There are targets, your teams are driving towards targets, there are continuous challenges, and it's not only from a week to week, sometimes it's on an hour to hour basis. But it is challenging individuals and it's challenging teams to think and do things differently. Then, importantly, we need to be able to reassess and we need to reflect. And in all of this, we as leaders need to consider, do we set times aside for employees to take breaks? And when we say, do we set the times, we know that people take lunch breaks, and very often we work through our lunch breaks. Um, how often do you encourage your staff to get up, move away from the desk, go outside, take a breather? If you can see that somebody is being frustrated through a situation, do we encourage them to move away and come back and review? Are we encouraging things like relaxation? We talk about home-life balance. Are we practicing and encouraging our people to practice work-life balances as well? And then we've gone through this across the board and moving people back into the workplace. It's still going to be happening, but we need to be able to encourage people to work unconventionally. Just because we have 8 hours in a day doesn't mean that we have to start at 8 o'clock and finish at 4 o'clock, or can we actually be a little bit more unconventional and change how we work? If we are working towards objectives, then allow your individuals to work towards those objectives at their own pace, at their own time, provided the deliverables are met all of the time. And that wraps up where we are with today. So where do we go to from here? Inside of our Workforce 2030, we have a number of programs that look at all of the concepts that we've discussed today, as well as explore things like collaboration and leadership strategies more and more. As we move forward, we're going to ask that if you enjoyed the session, please invite a friend or colleague, ask them to join us for the next one. Our next open source training is going to be on the 27th of July. And in this session, we're going to start looking at how do we master conflict management and negotiation, and all of this with the intention of us improving, building and strengthening our relationships and our team collaboration, and also refocusing on our skills for dealing with negotiations. Because a lot of what we've spoken about today in working with our team, in developing our people, in asking them and challenging them to change, deals with how we negotiate. Again, linking very strongly into communication. So from my side, thank you very, very much for your ears, for listening to me for the last hour and a little bit. I trust that you've enjoyed yourselves. It's been fun engaging with all of you. Thank you for your insights, and I look forward to seeing you online at another date and another time. So thank you very much. Have a lovely evening. Please be safe on the roads and stay warm.